that would be helpful.
Certainly.
Good, thank you. The other issue that I wanted to cover off was just some information about the Ruddock review. So, in particular, we understand from comments from Prime Minister Turnbull that it's going to be released shortly. So
just for information, Senator Rice, this were a series of questions by Senator Kitching were asked on this topic earlier. I'm sure officials wouldn't mind repeating themselves a little bit if necessary, but we shouldn't go over
all right, I won't take too much time.
Yeah, of course.
Some basic questions. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to be there.
No, that's
Senator
quite all right.
Kitching was asking those questions.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, as was mentioned earlier, obviously it will be considered by government in the normal way, but the Prime Minister has indicated that he'll be looking to release the report fairly shortly.
So you don't have any more specificity
I'm afraid,
about what shortly means?
No, it's the Secretariat to the review. We've handed over the report on Friday and the government's considering it, and it's a matter for the Prime Minister now.
Okay. Is the department investigating how the recommendations of the report were leaked to the Courier Mail, given that it's not public as yet?
I'm not aware that the recommendations of the report were leaked to the Courier Mail. I saw media on Friday morning that speculated about the content of the report in a fairly, well, in a way that suggested it knew what might be in it. I'm not saying whether that was accurate or not. But then it went on later in the same article say the report hadn't been handed to government, which was perfectly accurate at the time. So I have not heard any suggestion that it was leaked.
Well, I mean, they were claiming that they knew what was in it, which certainly implies a leak. That's true.
As I said, I've not heard any suggestion that it was leaked.
Were any of the participants in the review or religious organisations, have they had any indication given to them what the recommendations are going to be, or provided with a copy of the report?
Obviously, I can only speak for the Secretariat, but certainly not from us, and I would be very surprised if anyone from the panel had provided it.
Right.
So I think the answer is no. I can't absolutely give you that answer, but I'd be very surprised.
Okay, so you don't know. So after the Courier Mail article, you haven't investigated as to whether anybody had in fact supplied anybody with a copy of the report?
Obviously, we had some internal conversations. I spoke to the Prime Minister's office, but you know, we settled essentially on the fact that it looked like speculation dressed up as fact. Whether that's true or not, I do know that. However, I can say that the journalist in question had asked a series of questions of the Prime Minister's office during the week, asking them to confirm or deny certain things. So, you know, obviously we're putting together an article during the week.
And now that all the hearings, you know, obviously been completed, I was interested to know just sort of a bit of reflection on how all of the people that were heard were selected and whether anyone complained that they weren't invited to be heard by the panel.
So I think as we discussed last time at Estimates, we went through a process whereby we tried to identify a balanced range of views on religious freedom obviously from, you know, religious groups, but also human rights bodies, bodies that represented groups that are particularly affected by exceptions and exemptions in laws that apply. For example, LGBTI groups obviously are particularly affected by some of the anti-discrimination provision exceptions and exemptions. So we went through that process, looked at academics who had a particular interest in the topic and significant, you know, other significant people. So, for example, you know, former Age Discrimination Commissioner and former parliamentarian Susan Ryan had a long interest in these type of issues dating back to the drafting of the Sex Discrimination Act. So met with her. I tapped some of my contacts in the human rights community to get their views on people that we should meet with. The panel had some views about who they should meet with, and we put together a program from that. We then adjusted that program based on the submissions we were receiving early on. So where we got, you know, a submission that the panel was particularly interested or taken with, we might have invited them as well. We were keen to meet with as many of the state discrimination commissioners as we could. And we also worked with some of the state governments to meet with some of their multi-faith forums as well as an efficient way of meeting, large groups of people.
And so did anyone complain to the panel that they weren't heard, that they wanted to be heard and they weren't heard by the panel?
The only complaint I can remember receiving was from someone saying they hadn't had enough time with the panel rather than actually complaining that they weren't met with. That's the only instance I can think of. Okay.
And are you able to tell me who that was?
So it was one of the church groups, one of the Anglican church groups.
Okay. I note recent poll results put out by the organisation Just Equal that showing that the vast majority of Australians don't want to see people fired from their jobs due to their sexuality or gender. And so basically feeling that the existing exemptions from our anti-discrimination legislation should be removed. Does the report reflect this sentiment of the majority of Australians?
So I'm aware of the poll and Just Equal provided that I think it was just a letter reflecting the polling to us. I think on Thursday maybe of last week. We handed the report in on Friday. So the report certainly doesn't refer to that. I think it will probably come as no enormous surprise to anyone. I don't think I'm giving away anything by saying that those exemptions were one of the most topical issues that was discussed, and you'll find that in numerous of the submissions that we received. That was one of the issues that was most raised. So of course the report talks about that issue. But the other thing I would say is, and this is, I think, is quite important, we got a very large number of submissions, as we've said previously. The panel never saw this as a question of, where do the numbers lie? They looked at this very much as the question they were asked was about the adequacy of legal protections. And they were looking at that question and looking at evidence that goes to, are they adequate? Do they go too far? Rather than, how many of our, 15,269 submissions that we've settled as the number say that they go too far or don't go the other way. But
clearly, the number of submissions that you got reflects how fired up people were about putting in submissions. So I'm interested to know whether...
We took that into account, that obviously it's an issue that people were taking seriously, but the way those fell was not of particular interest.
Whether the panel recognised the fact that the majority of Australians, the vast majority of Australians, according to the Just Equal survey, felt that our existing exemptions from our anti-discrimination actually went too far.
We drew it to their attention, but it came very, very late in the piece in terms of drafting. It was with the editor by then.
Okay. And finally, there were questions raised publicly by submitters to the review, noting in particular that Mr Ruddock appeared to question whether LGBTIQ youth really suffered disproportionate levels of self-harm or mental health problems. Do you feel that Mr Ruddock actually had the necessary understanding of the issues faced by LGBTIQ people to be able to be leading this review?
So I've seen those media reports. I wasn't in the particular consultations, but some of my staff were. The first thing I would say is that the approach of all members of the panel was to ask people to evidence the claims that they made, not in the sense of justifying, but saying, when you say 10%, what's that based on? What report are you pointing to, so that we could use that information more effectively? So if you're saying that there's higher suicide rates, what reports are you relying on to claim that, so that we can have regard to that in developing the report? So the approach of all the panellists throughout the process was to ask those kind of questions on what basis are you saying that, and we did get different numbers on different issues. On the broader question, yes, I think he absolutely did, and I think all the panellists did. I think we got substantial amounts of evidence on those issues. I think, and not pointing to any particular member, some had varying exposures to these types of issues and the numbers and the particular concerns, but by the end I felt very confident that all the panellists had a really sound understanding of the particular issues facing those segments of the community.
And particularly, yes, that for many of these people, that these, that
Absolutely.
one person's religious freedom, when can be experienced as discrimination that leads to serious mental health issues.
And the panel was very aware of the different interests that were at stake in the question.
And finally, I'm told that that Mr. Ruddock changed his style and tone of questioning after the online outlet junkies started asking questions about it. So did anyone at PM&C have a word to him about that after the sort of that junkie asking about Ruddock's way of questioning?
So if anyone at PM&C had a word to him about it, it would have been me, and the answer is no. I think that, look, I didn't notice any particular difference in the approach he took throughout the review. You know, he has a particular style of asking questions, and I think that held fairly consistent.
You felt that he stayed being the same throughout the review?
Yeah, there was nothing noticeably different that I can think of off the top of my head.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator.